the night Harlow decided to stop bleeding quietly. She was sitting on the cold tile of her bathroom floor with Syndicate she'd bought at a dollar store 3 years ago and never used. Not for clothes, anyway. The needle was too thick. She knew that before she started, but the cut on her thigh, a clean slice from the edge of a broken filing cabinet drawer that had given way without warning when she'd yanked it too hard at 11:30 that night, wasn't closing on its own, and she didn't have the money for an ER visit, and she wasn't going to call anyone because there was no one to call. She threaded the needle by the light of her phone screen. Her hands weren't shaking. That was the thing she noticed, almost clinically, the way she noticed everything about herself these days, like she was someone else's case study, someone else's cautionary tale. Her hands were perfectly steady. She'd been through worse and done it quieter. The apartment was the kind of place that looked like it had been giving up on itself for 20 years before she moved in. One window that stuck, a radiator that banged twice every night at 3 a.m. like it was knocking to be let out. The super had been promising to fix the front door lock since February. It was now October. Harlow had stopped writing it down in her notebook, the list of things that were broken. At some point, the list became the place itself. She pressed the edges of the cut together with 2 fingers and exhaled slowly through her nose. She'd looked it up on her phone. She knew what she was doing was approximate at best, but she'd done approximate at best her whole life, and she was still here, so. She was 3 stitches in when she heard it. Not a knock, not exactly. More like the deliberate silence that happens before someone decides to knock, the kind of stillness that only comes from a person who is used to being the loudest thing in a room without saying a word. Then the knock. 2. Slow. Even. Harlow didn't move. She looked at the bathroom door, which was open because she lived alone, and because closing it made the room feel like a coffin, and then she looked at her front door beyond it, and she thought, it's almost midnight. Nobody came to her door at almost midnight. Nobody came to her door at all, really. Her neighbor to the left was an elderly man named Frank who communicated exclusively in nods. Her neighbor to the right had moved out in August. She had no friends in this building, no family in this city, and the only people who had her address were her employer and the electric company, and neither of them knocked like that. She set down the needle. She pressed a folded washcloth to her thigh and pushed herself to standing. Careful, slow. She didn't make a sound. The knock came again. Still 2. Still unhurried, like the person on the other side of the door had nowhere else to be and every reason to wait. Harlow pulled on a pair of sweatpants over the makeshift bandage, grabbed the small canister of pepper spray off the shelf above the toilet. She kept it there because the bathroom had no lock, and she'd learned early that the room you're most vulnerable in should also be the most defended. And walked to the door. She looked through the peephole, and for a moment she forgot about the cut on her leg entirely. Caine was standing in her hallway, not an associate, not a driver, not one of the men who moved through the periphery of his world like shadows that had learned to wear suits. Caine himself, tall enough that the hallway's low ceiling felt like an insult to him. Dark coat, no tie, his jaw carrying 3 days of stubble that on any other man would have looked careless, but on him looked like a decision. He was looking directly at the peephole. He couldn't see her, she knew that, but it felt in a way that unsettled her more than the knock had, like he could. "I know you're there, Harlow," he said. His voice came through the door clearly. It always did, that low, unhurried cadence that she'd heard deliver verdicts that ended careers, and she'd heard ask for his coffee without sugar, and both times it had sounded exactly the same. "Open the door." Not a question. She hated that about him. She also opened the door because she wasn't stupid, and because there was a reason Caine ran the Aldgate Syndicate, and kept running it and had been running it since she was 19 years old, and first heard his name in the context of do not look directly at that man if you ever want to sleep again. She left the chain on. He looked at the chain. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite amusement, not quite respect. Something that lived between those two things and didn't have a name she'd found yet. "The chain," he said. "The chain," she agreed. "A beat. Take it off." Tell me why you're here, Harlow Caine. She said his name the way he said hers. Flat even, like it was simply the word for the thing she meant. She'd noticed early, 6 months into working as his syndicate's lead bookkeeper, that he responded differently to people who matched his register. Not warmly. Caine did not do warmly. But something in him settled, the way a large animal settles when it stops calculating whether the smaller thing across from it is going to run. She wasn't going to run. She never had. He looked down. She followed his gaze and realized the washcloth had slipped, and there was a thin, dark line of blood tracking down her calf where she hadn't quite cleaned the edge of the wound before she got up. When she looked back at him, the expression on his face was different. Not softer. That wasn't the right word, more dense. Like something had compressed itself behind his eyes that had previously been moving freely. "Open the door, Harlow," he said. "Quieter this time." Not softer, quieter. She thought about it for 2 full seconds, which was the most honest accounting she could give. Then she slid the chain off. He came in without touching her, without looking at anything except the direction she'd come from. He noted the bathroom light. He noted the needle and thread on the edge of the sink. He noted the dollar store kit on the floor, the phone with the medical diagram still pulled up on the screen, the bloodied washcloth. He stood in her bathroom doorway and looked at all of it for a long moment. "How deep?" he said. "Not a question. Manageable. That's not what I asked. It doesn't need a hospital." He turned and looked at her then, the full weight of it, the kind of look that Harlow had watched make grown men lose their composure in meeting rooms. It didn't make her lose her composure. She'd lost everything composure was meant to protect years ago, and what was left was just her, standing in sweatpants with a pepper spray canister she'd forgotten she was still holding. He looked at the canister. She set it on the shelf. "Sit down," he said. "I was fine before you got here. I know you were," he said it without a pause, without condescension. Just a statement of fact. "Sit down anyway." She sat on the closed toilet lid because it was the only option in a bathroom this size, and because standing on one leg was starting to make the other one ache in a way she wasn't going to let him see. Caine crouched down in front of her. She'd seen him in tailored suits in boardrooms. She'd seen him across a table from men who were terrified of him and doing everything in their power not to show it. She had never seen him like this, eye level with her, jacket open, sleeves still buttoned at the wrist, examining her leg with the focused, impersonal attention of someone who had dealt with wounds before and found them less frightening than most. He looked up. "You were using a dollar store needle. I'm on a dollar store budget. You work for me. I work for the Aldgate Syndicate's accounting division, which pays me a salary that is, I want to note, not bad. It's just that I also have." She stopped. She hadn't meant to start that sentence. "Student loans," he said. 62,000. Current balance. Plus your mother's medical debt, which you're paying down at $400 a month. Plus this apartment, which you're overpaying for because it's the first place you signed a lease that didn't ask for a cosigner." He paused. "I know what you make, Harlow. I set the number." She looked at him steadily. "Then you know exactly why I'm using a dollar store needle." Something happened in his jaw. A small tightening, like he was holding something back that hadn't been asked to come out. "This is going to need to be redone," he said. "The 3rd stitch pulled. I can redo it. You can't see the angle. You were working blind. I had a diagram." He stood up and she heard him make a call, 2 words, a name and an address, and then he ended it, and crouched back down and said, "My medic will be here in 20 minutes. Don't take out the stitches you already placed. Leave them. He'll work around them." Harlow stared at him. "You have a personal medic. Everyone in my line of work has a medic. That's—" She stopped herself from saying alarming because she was already aware of what his line of work was. She had been the one doing his books. She knew exactly what the syndicate ran, and what it cost and what it generated, down to the last decimal point, and she had made her peace with it, or something that functioned like peace, because the alternative was being back at the rent-a-desk accounting firm in the strip mall on Route 9 that had let her go after 8 months without severance. "Why are you here?" she said. "It's midnight." Caine stood. He moved out of the bathroom doorway and leaned against the wall opposite, arms crossed, looking at her with that expression she'd been trying to catalogue since she started at the Syndicate. The one where he was calculating something and deciding how much of the calculation to share. "The Mercer accounts," he said. She went still. There were 2 sets of books for the Mercer portfolio. Everyone knew there were 2 sets of books. Nobody except her and Caine was supposed to know which numbers belonged to which set. She'd flagged an inconsistency 3 weeks ago, not loudly, not in writing, in person, in the 15-minute window he maintained for operational concerns that couldn't go through the usual channels. He'd said, "Sit on it." She'd sat on it. "What about them?" she said. Someone pulled the secondary ledger. The words landed one at a time, the way bad news always did. First the sentence, then the meaning, then the implication, which in this case was large and structural and the kind of thing that made the dollar store needle on the sink feel very small and very far away. When? This evening? After close, from the server, or from physical, the copy you maintain at the office. She felt herself doing the math automatically, the way she always did, the way her brain had rewired itself somewhere around age 15, when she realized that numbers were the one thing in the world that didn't have opinions about where she'd come from. If the physical copy was gone, then whoever had it knew the structure, knew the real figures, knew the discrepancy she'd been sitting on. Who else had access to that cabinet? Caine said. No one, it's keyed separately. The lock was intact. Then someone had a copy of the key, or she stopped, or someone had my key, which means they were either in my office or... She stopped again. He was looking at her with that compressed expression again. Or here, she finished. She looked at the apartment around her, the stuck window, the broken front door lock she'd reported in February, the super who'd never come. She thought about the filing cabinet at work and the way the drawer had given way suddenly, the way she'd grabbed it and it had come apart in her hands, the thin, clean slice of metal across her thigh. "Was the drawer tampered with?" she said. Caine's silence was its own answer. She breathed in slowly, out slowly. The washcloth on her leg had soaked through on one side. She pressed it tighter without looking at it. "You came yourself," she said. "You didn't send anyone. You came at midnight, too." She was working through it, the same way she worked through columns that didn't balance, looking for the variable that would make the numbers resolve. "You were already watching The Office. I was in the area. Caine." He met her eyes. "You came at midnight because you wanted to know if I was the one who pulled it," she said. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His not answering was a kind of answer in itself, and they both knew it. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about being angry. She weighed it, turned it over, set it back down. "Smart," she said finally. "I'd have done the same." Something shifted in him. Small. Almost imperceptible. But she'd spent 6 months learning the economy of his expressions, the way a single fraction of movement in his face meant more than a paragraph from most men, and she caught it. "You're not angry," he said. "I'm many things. Angry is probably 4th or 5th on the list." "What's first?" "Tired," she said, without thinking, and then wished she hadn't, because it was true in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. She was tired in the marrow. The kind of tired that came from years of being the only person in the room who did the math, and then being the last person anyone thanked for it. He looked at her for a long moment, not calculatingly, for once, just looked. "The medic will need to know your blood type," he said. "Oh, positive." He sent a text. They waited. She didn't offer him tea, because she didn't have any, and he didn't ask for anything, which she suspected was not his usual behavior, but was what happened when he was in a room and deciding something he hadn't finished deciding yet. The medic arrived in 18 minutes. He was a compact, quiet man named Reeves, who spoke to Harlow in the patient exact tones of someone accustomed to explaining things once, correctly, in situations where no one had time for twice. He redid 2 of her stitches, placed 3 more, cleaned and dressed the wound with supplies from a kit that cost more than her monthly grocery budget, and was gone in 25 minutes. Caine stayed. She noticed this only after Reeves left, and the apartment was quiet again, and she registered that Caine was still leaning against the wall, coat on, watching her test her weight on the leg. "You should go," she said. "The secondary ledger," he said. "Walk me through the inconsistency again. Here, now, you were going to stay awake with it anyway." She looked at him. He was right. She was going to be awake with it for hours, going through it in her head, the numbers rotating like they always did when something didn't balance. She sat down on the couch, which was the only piece of furniture in the apartment she'd bought new, because she'd decided early on that she would sleep and sit on things that were hers and not someone else's discarded furniture. It was small, and it was a color she'd stopped calling burgundy and started calling red that I can live with. But it was hers. She started talking through the numbers. He listened the way he did everything, completely, silently, with an attention that felt almost physical in its weight. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask clarifying questions until she was finished. He waited until she'd laid out the whole structure, the original figures and the manipulated ones and the trails she'd identified, and then he said, "The variance first appeared in March, 3rd week of March. Right after the Denton Street property closed and someone with knowledge of that transaction and access to the ledger and time to be subtle about it," she said. "This wasn't a grab. It was a slow adjustment. 2% here, a reclassification there, someone patient." He was quiet. "Someone who thought I wouldn't catch it," she added. "Most wouldn't have. Most aren't me." She hadn't meant it as defiance. It was simply true. Numbers talked to her the way weather talked to some people. Not in a mystical sense, but in the sense that she'd spent so long paying attention that she'd learned their texture, and something wrong had a different texture than something right, and she felt it before she understood it. He was looking at her again, with that not-quite-named thing between amusement and respect. "No," he said, "they aren't." She looked at her hands, which were folded in her lap, which was something she did when she was not going to let herself fidget. "There's a short list of people who could have done this slowly enough not to trigger the automated flags. Give me the list. I already gave you the list 3 weeks ago. Give it to me again." She did. 4 names. He knew all 4. He didn't react to any of them, which meant he'd already been moving through the same calculation she had, and had possibly been moving through it longer. The person who pulled the physical copy tonight knew it was the only version of that record not on the main server, she said. "Yes, which narrows the 4 to 2, yes, and narrows it further," she said carefully, "because the other person on the list with that level of access was the one who told me to sit on the inconsistency for 3 weeks instead of flagging it through official channels." She let that sit. Caine looked at her. Something in the room had shifted, the temperature or the light or the specific quality of his attention, which was different now from the way it had been when he came in. He had come in weighing her. He had come in with a question that lived underneath every other question he'd asked. He was done asking it. "You think I'm testing you," he said. "I think you're always testing everyone," she said. "I think that's what keeps you alive. And I think tonight was a test with a secondary function, which was to find out whether I'd been compromised. And I'm sitting in my apartment with a dollar store sewing kit and a leg that someone tried to slow me down with, talking you through a ledger discrepancy at 1 in the morning, she said. "Make of that what you want." He didn't say anything for a long time. "Then, the 2 remaining names on your list. One of them is getting married next month." She processed that. "Connolly. He's been spending ahead of his salary for 8 months. Custom suit. Beach house rental." The ring alone, Caine paused. He needed the margin the reclassification provided, and he needed to pull the physical copy tonight because he found out 2 days ago that you'd flagged the inconsistency. Harlow sat with that. Someone had told Connolly, which meant there was a second thread, and the second thread meant the list of people who knew about her 3 weeks ago conversation with Caine was not as short as it should have been. "Someone in that meeting," she said. "There was no meeting. It was you and me and the hallway outside my office." She thought about the hallway outside his office, the angle of it, the way sound moved in that building, which was old and had thick walls everywhere except the door to the stairwell, she said. "It doesn't seal properly on the left side. You can hear clearly from the landing above." He went very still. "I noticed it the first week," she said. "I didn't say anything because I assumed you'd chosen that location specifically and had your own reasons. I chose it," he said, "because it was 12 steps from my office, and I had 3 minutes. Then someone was on the landing." The silence that followed was a particular kind, the kind where a large structure is being quietly revised. Caine looked at her for a long moment. Then he took out his phone and made a single call, no name, 2 words, and ended it. "Connolly won't be getting married next month," he said. She didn't ask what that meant. She knew what it meant. She had known for 6 months what she was adjacent to, and she had made her accounting with it. And she did not have the luxury of pretending otherwise. "The secondary ledger," she said. "Do you need me to reconstruct it? It's already backed up. I run separate redundancies for every physical document that touches the Mercer accounts." She stared at him. Then why? She stopped. She ran it back. The pulled copy, the drawer, the test, the conversation she'd just walked through for the last hour. The pulled copy was a dummy. He waited. "You seeded a dummy copy in the cabinet. Someone took it. They'll find clean numbers, nothing actionable." She paused. "You already knew it was Connolly. I had a strong indication. And you came here too." She stopped again. He had come here at midnight with a different question than the one he'd asked her. He had come to see whether she was compromised. Yes. But he had also come to see what she looked like when she thought no one from work was watching. He had come to see the apartment and the needle, and the way her hands didn't shake. He had come to hear her walk through the analysis at 1 a.m. with a freshly dressed wound and no apologies. She understood now at a cellular level why Caine ran the Aldgate Syndicate and kept running it. He didn't trust information. He trusted people who moved through information honestly in the dark when no one they were trying to impress was watching. "The salary I set for you," he said. "It's wrong." She blinked. "What? It's too low. I set it based on the rate card for the role. That was a calculation error on my part." He said this the way he said everything, without weight, without performance. Like he was correcting a column that hadn't balanced. "I'll have it adjusted by the end of the week." She looked at him. She thought about the $62,000, the $400 a month. The apartment with the broken lock and the window that stuck. "How much of an adjustment?" she said. "Enough that you don't have to use a dollar store needle." She didn't say anything for a moment. "I also want you moved," he said. "Not immediately, not conspicuously, but the front door. Lock here is a problem that predates tonight, and the stairwell access to your floor is unrestricted, and now Connolly's people know your address. I'm not in witness protection, Caine." "No," he said. "You're considerably more valuable than that." It was not a warm thing to say. It was not meant to be. It was a statement of operational fact from a man who thought in terms of assets and liabilities, and the cost of losing things he couldn't easily replace. But she had been not valued for a long time. She had been underpaid and overlooked, and given the kind of acknowledgement that came in the form of "yeah, that tracks," fine when she'd walked someone through analysis that saved them money or trouble or both, and she had learned to metabolize the absence of recognition the way you metabolized anything you couldn't change, quietly, efficiently, without complaint. So the fact that Caine said it clinically, without warmth, without decoration, made it easier to believe. She looked at the wall across from her couch. There was a mark on it where the previous tenant had hung something heavy. She'd always meant to put something there she never had. "Okay," she said. "Okay to the move, or both," she said. "Okay to both." He nodded. Once. The way he signed off on things. Not like agreement, like recognition. Like the account had been reviewed and the numbers had balanced and the transaction could proceed. He straightened, reached into his coat pocket and set a card on her coffee table. Plain, no name. A handwritten number on the back in ink, so dark it was almost black. "If anything shifts before the move is arranged," he said, "call that number. Not the office. That number." She looked at the card, then at him. "You're leaving," she said. "It's after 1. You've been here for 2 hours," he said. Yes, she didn't say, "You didn't have to stay," because he knew that. He was a man who had not done anything. he didn't intend to do in a very long time, and staying for 2 hours at the apartment of his bookkeeper at 1 in the morning while his medic stitched her leg was something he had chosen and presumably intended. She walked him to the door. Her leg ached in the clean, particular way of healing rather than damage, which was a distinction she'd learned to appreciate. At the door, he paused. "The filing cabinet drawer," he said. "The one that cut you. What about it?" "It was replaced this afternoon. I ordered it when I found out about the physical copy. I should have had it checked before you came back in." She looked at him. "It wasn't your fault," she said. "No," he said. "It was mine. I'm noting that because I don't make the same error twice." He said it the same way he said everything else. Without drama. Without the performance of guilt that was really just a way of putting the other person in the position of saying, "No, really, it's fine." He just said it, stated it, let it stand. She held the door. "Good night, Caine," she said. "Lock this," he said. He tapped the deadbolt, which worked fine, which was the only lock in the apartment that did. "I always do," she said. He left. She listened to his footsteps go down the hall, unhurried, even, the same pace she'd heard inside 1,000 times. And then she closed the door and turned the deadbolt and stood there with her hand on it for a moment. Outside, the city went about its business. The radiator banged twice at 3 a.m., like it always did, like it was knocking to be let out. Harlow sat on the red that she could live, with couch, and looked at the card on the coffee table. She picked it up. She set it on the shelf above the toilet, next to the pepper spray. The two things she kept closest. She slept, finally, a few hours before dawn, the deep, uncomplicated sleep of someone who had balanced the books and found that the numbers, this time, came out right.